Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Joe Rogan Podcast Experience. I'm your host Felix. Unfortunately, Joe couldn't make it today. You see, he was refusing to wear a COVID mask and, he spends all his time in that studio. The air out there is just too pure for him. Anyway, we have him on a steady DMT drip, so here's hoping for a speedy recovery. Comment your get well wishes in the comments, or on our Patreon website at www.joe.rogan.www.com/store. Well, the show must go on. Just like the Spaniard colonizers in Aguirre, The Wrath of God, a 1972 film written and directed by Werner Herzog, starring longtime collaborator Klaus Kinski in the titular role. Aguirre is a high-ranking member of the Spanish expedition through the Amazon in search of the infamous lost city of gold. Tensions rise with inflating egos and paranoia from the elusive natives who pick off our expedition one by one. I am joined today by my co-host, my friend, Felix. How are you doing today, Felix? Oh, just fine. Thank you for having me here, Felix. No problemo, Felix. So, Felix is a renowned author, entrepreneur, water enthusiast, poet, hero, swimsuit model, and has passing knowledge in post-colonial theory. Tell me, Felix, what is the post-colonial theory, and how does it relate to our film? Well, Felix, that is a great question. Well, thank you, Felix. You're always welcome, Felix. Well, I invited you here, so post-colonial theory is two words. Post and colonial. Do you know what that means? Yes, well, I wasn't asking you. Put these together and understand. It is theory considering the aftermath of colonization. Texts written after colonization are post-colonial texts, but the theory is most relevant when considering texts which concern themselves with stories about colonization or victims of colonization. Aguirre is one of those texts. Yes. Aguirre des un Goetz. You know German? I know many things, Felix. That's why I'm here. Aguirre des un Goetz is a story of men with slaves entering unconquered land hoping to exploit its resources. According to Teen Vogue, the three primary motivations for first-wave colonial expansion is God, gold, and glory. Quote, God, because missionaries felt it was their moral duty to spread Christianity. Gold, because colonizers would exploit resources of other countries in order to bolster their own economies. And glory, since European nations would often compete with one another over glory of attaining the greatest number of colonies. These motivations are all present in the text. Jamie, pull up the clips. God.
Has this savage heard of our Savior Jesus Christ and of our true mission to save their souls?
Gold.
Gold. Gold. Ask him where he got that. Ask him where El Dorado is.
And glory.
Our land is already 6 times larger than Spain. And every day we drift makes it bigger.
Ah, I see. Yes, but what about the native peoples? We don't actually see the native people much throughout the film, yet they really are a presence. Indeed. There's a scene in the film where the gunpowder catches on fire and starts a commotion. Yes, things were unusually quiet beforehand. The Emperor falls into the river. and they find one of their men has been shot by the Indians.
He's dead.
Look how short the arrow is.
Poison.
Must belong to a dwarf.
I find it quite interesting how the Indians in this scene are not shown at all. I feel it is a deliberate choice on the director to build tension, and it puts us in the position of the Spaniard colonizers. We discover the corpse with them. We never see him shot down, only the result. I once heard a man ask, what is more frightening, when you see a crow, or when you don't see a crow? I would imagine the crow poses a more imminent threat. He said it is the lack of crow. You see, when the crow is missing, you don't know when it will attack. Ah, I see. That is very fitting. This terror mythicizes the natives in the film, which is another form of othering. Othering? Yes. Colonizers come from a world where they are the dominant group. Don Lope de Aguirre and crew are Spaniards from Spain. We call the dominant group the hegemony. Due to this hegemony, they think that they are normal. If the colonizers are what's normal, then what are the indigenous people of the untamed land? An other. Right. That's why I think it's relevant that we see two sort of images of the natives. Two Indians row out to meet the Spaniards. They speak through translation by one of the slaves and are actually quite homely. Polite, all things considered. Something about a prophecy. It's classic river movie business.
January 24th. For the first time we saw two Indians. They seemed to be friendly.
Now, when we contrast this image of the polite, visible natives with the violent, invisible natives who communicate with arrows and spears instead of language and translation, it's actually quite jarring. It's almost as if they are a different people. Exactly. The film is showing us the native peoples as people, and then showing the Spaniards' mythicized version of these people with the invisible crow and silent arrows. It is partaking in the othering through myth, because it has shown us the truth. We see the contrast. Commentary on how these myths are formed and their farcical nature. Alienation is very easy. When Abel Tasman visited New Zealand, some of his crewmates were killed by Maori. The image of Maori became ignoble savages, and that was the myth for about 127 years.
Come on, play something for the man.
There are more native characters in the film, about 100 Indian slaves and a black man. He's a slave too. It's almost an interview with an Indian slave who used to be a prince. Slaves are quite post-colonial, aren't they? Yes. Aren't I clever? Because it's like slavery, Europe got all the slaves when they were colonizing and stuff, right? You mean that slavery was an institution started by imperial powers as a result of colonization directly? And so, when considering texts after colonization and the effects of colonization, slavery is a product of colonization which has deeply affected the black populations in countries all over the world? Let me do the post-colonial talk. All right, Felix?
My people have seen earthquakes, diseases, floods, but what the Spaniards did to us, it's much more terrible. They have given me the name of Balthazar, but my real name is Bruno Rimac.
What's that name?
Bruno Rimac. He who speaks. I was a prince in this land, and my people had to look to the ground. And no one was allowed to look into my eyes. My people are in chains, just like me, and I must look to the ground. All of us have been made weaker. I cannot fight you, fight with yourselves. I'm very sorry for you, because there is no way out, and I'll never return to my home.
The process of colonization neglects and disrupts the existing cultures of the places that are colonized. In the book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which I just so happen to have here, author Walter Rodney argues that European exploitation of Africa is responsible for it being an underdeveloped state, while it led to Europe becoming a developed state. Quote, "The question as to who and what is responsible for African underdevelopment can be answered at two levels. Firstly, the answer is that the operation of the imperialist system bears major responsibility for African economic retardation by draining African wealth and making it impossible to develop more rapidly the resources of the continent. Secondly, one has to deal with those who manipulated the system. The capitalists of Western Europe were the ones who actively extended their exploitation from inside Europe to cover the whole of Africa." What? Europe had no consideration for Africa when it colonized the continent and scrambled for its resources, and the result of the exploitation is that Europe could develop greatly while Africa could not. Colonizers have no regards to colonized people as people, only as resources, and the prince character shows this, as all the existing customs and culture, people averting his gaze and such, is changed fundamentally. It's as if he was never there, as if they were never an individual peoples. Fundamentally, it is a loss of dignity. The black slave similarly loses dignity, serving the purpose to scare the Indians, though it's not even clear if it actually works.
As we feared an ambush, we took off the clothes of the Negro slave to frighten the Indians.
More likely it's just their conjecture. I find it interesting how the horse serves the same purpose.
Okello, is it true that you were also in the pay of Orsua?
I was Pizarro's slave. Then he gave me away to this expedition. And for him, the Indians would be frightened by a horse. But they'd be scared stiff of a black man.
It's like the slave and the horse are the same thing to these people. The slave is worth as much as the horse. He's not a person deserving of respect, just an animal, a thing. It's a loss of dignity for all of them, really. To own slaves is to reject the notion that they have dignity as a people. The filmmaker is showing the perspective, explaining the mindset a colonizer of this vein needs. Yes. I think we understand the Spaniards better when we see them interact with the two Indians. In the scene, we mentioned it earlier, it's mainly like watching their reactions. They row up and start talking about their prophecy, but it's interrupted.
Look at this gold. Where did he get this? Where did you get that?
The Indians' interests are rejected. They're only really there for their usefulness to the Spaniards. It speaks to their perspective. Eurocentrism is a perspective which favors Europe over other cultures. It's the idea that Europeans and their culture is normal, and others are other. Didn't we already talk about the other? Hegemony is natives as the other. Eurocentrism is related, its culture is the other. This is post-colonial theory, and this is the perspective of the European colonizer. Is Spain a part of Europe? Is it? Jamie! Is Spain part of Europe? It could apply to colonizers outside of Europe. Jamie! It's an aspect of human nature. Is it a part of Europe? Jamie! Is Spain a part of Europe? Is Spain in Europe? Jamie! I think Spain is in Europe. Yes. So, the rejection of the natives' interests in favor of the Spaniard interests displays Eurocentrism. Because Spain is in Europe. Yes. It is further shown in the preaching of the Bible. Religion is a product of the colonizer's culture, and the spread of it is a common consequence of colonization. Remember, gold, God, and glory.
This is a Bible. It contains the words of God, which we are bringing to enlighten the darkness of their world. Has he understood that in this book are stored the words of God? You may hold it, my son.
The Indian doesn't understand. There's a mistranslation or misunderstanding, and he tries to listen to the book, but because that doesn't work, he throws it down and is promptly killed. It is so shocking that the natives would disrespect Christianity in this way, even though it's just a misunderstanding, that they are slaughtered. It speaks to how extremely close these Spaniards hold the Bible that has an importance over human life, or at least native life. Historically, the early 1500s was still a period of apostasy in Spain, where all Spanish were made to convert to Roman Catholicism, or face exile or execution. In the 1520s, the Spanish were still accusing colonized peoples of renouncing Christ. Here's a quote from The Spanish Conquest and the Maya Collapse: How religious is change. With regard to the Maya conversion to Christianity in the 16th century, the writers of the documents categorized Maya behaviors, such as rituals carried out in churches, as evidence of apostasy and rebellion. Wait. Is it Christianity or Catholicism? Roman Catholicism is a branch of Christianity. Oh. All I'm trying to say is that the lingering faith in their God is what led to these conquistadors to kill the natives so swiftly. They valued their religion so strongly that they would take the lives of the natives because of disrespect. It's Eurocentric in the way that they completely ignored the sun god and river god prophecy that they were told, even though it may have been of use to them. It's like in Herzog's other river film, Fitzcarraldo, where they use the white god prophecy to employ the Indians to labor the steamboat over the hill. This Eurocentrism, this obsession with their own culture, it is ego. Thinking your culture is better or more correct than all others is ego. Treating other people without dignity because you think of them as lesser than you, animals to you, is narcissism. It's ego. Aguirre, the Wrath of God, is a story of how colonization is the product of an out-of-control sense of self-importance. Colonizers create myth out of fear. Colonizers neglect dignity and other perspectives out of their oversized ego. It is their quest to explore the world that they miss the truth every time. Well, I think we'll end it here. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for being on the show, Felix. Pleasure to be here, Felix. If you want to see more of my work, I have written a book. Oh dear, we've lost him. Well, I do hope Joe gets well soon. He won't be joining us next week, though, because by the time you've heard this, I will have liquidated the podcast and moved to Cuba. You see, I was the one who sold the show to Spotify, but I also sold it to SoundCloud, Mixer, and everywhere you get your podcasts. They all think they have exclusive rights to the Joe Rogan Podcast Experience Podcast. And they've paid me millions. The federal authorities are on their way, but they're no match for me. They're not smart enough to outwit me. I'll sell this microphone, and Joe's American flag, and the tinfoil for when Alex visits. Maybe I'll keep that. Oh, and I'll sell this cord here.